During our 10th anniversary dinner at the fancy Italian restaurant downtown, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Nolan. His smile seemed forced, and he kept glancing at his phone whenever it buzzed in his pocket. A tiny crease formed between his eyebrows, like he was anxious about something. "Everything okay?" I asked, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. The candlelight flickered in his brown eyes as he looked up. "Yeah, of course. Just work stuff. You know how it is." Nolan flashed me a reassuring grin, but I could tell he was holding something back. As we dug into our plates of linguine alla vongole, I tried to push the nagging feeling aside and enjoy the evening. Nolan and I had been together for over a decade, since we met in college. Back then, we were just two kids dreaming of building a life together in Seattle. Now, at 35, I was living that dream. A cozy house in the suburbs, a fulfilling job as an elementary school teacher, and a kind, loving husband who worked at a tech firm downtown. We didn't have kids yet, but we were comfortable and happy, or so I thought. Nolan reached for the bottle of Chianti to refill his glass, his third of the night. "To us," he said, raising his glass with a tight smile. 10 years down, forever to go." I clinked my glass against his, trying to ignore the way his eyes kept darting to his phone. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Nolan loved me, didn't he? But as the nights turned into weeks of his increasingly distant behavior, those niggling doubts only grew stronger. I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Something was very wrong in my perfect little world. "Maybe he's just going through a phase," Cora said over coffee one morning, her brow furrowed with concern. "Men can be like that sometimes, get distant when they're stressed about work or whatever." I shook my head, staring into the depths of my latte. "It's more than that, Cora. You should see how he is at home these days." Nolan had been coming home later and later from the office, his smiles growing forced by the day. We barely spoke anymore, and when we did, it felt like pulling teeth to get more than one-word answers out of him. "He's constantly on his phone, typing away furiously whenever I leave the room," I confided. "And the other night, when I suggested we go out for our usual date night, he just mumbled some excuse about having to work late." Cora reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry you're going through this. Have you tried talking to him about it?" A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "You think I haven't? Every time I bring it up, he just brushes me off, says he's been swamped at work and that it's nothing to worry about." But I knew better. Call it a wife's intuition, but deep down, I could sense that something was seriously wrong in our marriage. The Nolan I fell in love with, the caring, attentive man who used to dote on me, was slowly slipping away, replaced by this cold, distant stranger. That evening, I decided to try one more time. As Nolan sat on the couch, scrolling mindlessly on his phone, I approached him. "Nolan, we need to talk." My voice was steady, but my heart pounded in my chest. He glanced up, his expression unreadable. "About what?" "About us. Our marriage." I took a deep breath. "I can't help but feel like you've been pulling away lately, and I want to know why." For a moment, he just stared at me, his jaw clenched. Then, with a heavy sigh, he set his phone down. "It's just been really stressful at work, Lila. You know how demanding my job can be." I crossed my arms unconvinced. "That's not a good enough excuse, and you know it. We're supposed to be partners, remember? For better or worse. But lately, it feels like you've checked out of our marriage completely." Nolan ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched onto his face. "Look, I'm trying my best here, okay? Cut me some slack." "Some slack?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Nolan, I deserve better than this. We deserve better than what you've been giving our marriage." His lips pressed into a thin line, and for a split second I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, perhaps. But as quickly as it came, it was gone, replaced by a cold, detached expression. "Maybe you're right," he muttered, standing up abruptly. "Maybe this isn't working anymore." And with that, he grabbed his keys and walked out the door, leaving me standing there in stunned silence, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. A few weeks later, Nolan's company was hosting a big gala event to celebrate some major client wins. As his wife, I was expected to attend and play the part of the doting partner. Despite the growing rift between us, I agreed, hoping it might be a chance for us to reconnect. The venue was a swanky downtown hotel, and I had picked out a sleek black dress that hugged my curves just right. If Nolan wasn't going to make an effort, at least I could look good for myself. As we mingled with Nolan's colleagues and their partners, I plastered on a fake smile, making small talk about work and the weather. Nolan stuck close by my side, but his eyes kept drifting across the room, like he was searching for someone. That's when I spotted her. A tall, slender woman with long chestnut hair cascading over her bare shoulders. Her red dress clung to her body like a second skin, leaving little to the imagination. She was laughing at something a man had said, throwing her head back in an exaggerated gesture. Nolan's gaze locked onto her, and I felt a pang of recognition. This woman looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't quite place her. Before I could ponder it further, the woman's eyes met Nolan's, and she excused herself from her conversation partner. My heart sank as she began sauntering over to us, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "Nolan," she purred, resting a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "I've been looking for you all night." He cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Ivy, this is my wife, Lila. Lila, this is Ivy Richardson. She's a new project manager at the company." My smile froze on my face as realization hit me like a punch to the gut. So this was the woman Nolan had been messaging constantly. I was sure of it. Ivy's eyes raked over me with thinly veiled disdain. "Charmed, I'm sure," she drawled, making no effort to hide her contempt. "Likewise," I managed to choke out, my grip tightening around my champagne flute. Nolan laughed nervously, oblivious to the charged tension between us. "Well, you two should get to know each other better. Ivy's been doing great work on the Henderson account." "Is that so?" I asked through gritted teeth, shooting daggers at Ivy with my eyes. She smirked, running her hand slowly down Nolan's arm. "We've certainly been working closely together on a lot of things." The insinuation in her tone was undeniable, and a sickening realization washed over me. My husband, my Nolan, was having an affair with this vile, shameless woman right under my nose. I opened my mouth to unleash the torrent of fury building inside me, but Nolan cut me off. "Actually, I was just about to grab us some drinks from the bar. Can I get you anything, Ivy?" His voice was laced with a strange eagerness that made my skin crawl. "A dirty martini would be lovely," Ivy purred, her hand lingering on Nolan's arm for a beat too long. As he hurried off towards the bar, I rounded on Ivy, my face flushed with rage. "I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing here, but let me make one thing crystal clear. Nolan is my husband, and if you think you can just swoop in and steal him away, you've got another thing coming." Ivy tossed her hair over her shoulder, utterly unfazed by my outburst. "Oh, sweetie, the only one playing games here is your dear husband. But by all means, keep deluding yourself into thinking you actually mean something to him." Her words cut deeper than any knife, and I had to fight back the urge to slap that smug grin right off her face. Instead, I clenched my fists, trying to rein in my emotions. "You're going to regret this," I hissed through clenched teeth. "I'll make sure of it." Ivy let out a mocking laugh. Empty threats from a sad, pathetic woman. How deliciously tragic. She turned on her heel and sauntered away, leaving me seething and humiliated in the middle of the crowded ballroom. As Nolan rejoined me, oblivious to what had just transpired, I felt a cold, hard knot of determination form in the pit of my stomach. If it was war she wanted, then war was what she'd get. I would make Ivy regret the day she ever laid eyes on my husband. In the days following the gala, I barely slept or ate. My mind was consumed by the image of Ivy's hand trailing down Nolan's arm, her voice dripping with smugness as she all but admitted to their affair. The betrayal burned like acid in my veins. I needed proof. Solid, undeniable evidence that I could shove in Nolan's face and make him see the truth. Maybe then some small part of the man I loved would resurface and put an end to this madness. So one night, as Nolan snored lightly beside me, I reached over and snatched his phone off the nightstand. My hands trembled as I tapped in his passcode, our anniversary date, a bitter irony. The phone unlocked, revealing a flurry of messages from a contact simply labeled IR. My heart pounded as I opened the thread. There it was, in black and white. Hundreds of messages between Nolan and Ivy, some innocuous but many far too intimate for mere colleagues. "Can't wait to see you tonight, handsome. You looked incredible at the party. That dress left little to the imagination. I miss the feeling of your lips on mine." White-hot rage seared through me as I read their shameless exchanges. This was so much worse than I'd imagined, a full-blown emotional affair at the very least. Bile rose in my throat, but I forced myself to keep reading, taking screenshots to document the evidence. I needed ammunition for the war that was about to come. As I scrolled further back in time, my blood ran cold at one particular message from Nolan. "You're right, I do need to end things with Lila. This has gone too far, and she deserves better than living a lie." My hands went numb, nearly dropping the phone. He'd been planning to leave me, to discard me like a piece of trash for that vile succubus Ivy. A choked sob escaped my lips before I could stop it. Nolan stirred beside me. "Lila?" he mumbled groggily. "What's wrong?" I turned to face him, tears streaming down my cheeks, clutching his phone like a lifeline. "How could you?" I whispered hoarsely. "How could you do this to me, to us?" His eyes went wide as he took in the phone, panic flashing across his features. "Lila, I can explain." "Explain what?" I spat, anger eclipsing my hurt. "That you've been carrying on an affair with that woman behind my back? That you were going to leave me for her?" Nolan opened and closed his mouth, at a loss for words. Pathetic. "I loved you," I choked out, my voice thick with emotion. "I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me?" He surged forward, reaching out as if to embrace me. "Baby, please. It's not what it looks like." But I recoiled from his touch, holding up the phone defiantly. "Don't you dare try to deny it, Nolan. I have all the proof I need right here." His face crumpled in resignation as he slowly sank back onto the bed. "I'm so sorry," he whispered brokenly. "I never meant to hurt you." I let out a bitter laugh, swiping at the tears on my cheeks. "Well, you did. You hurt me more than you'll ever know." As I turned and stormed out of the bedroom, clutching the phone with the damning evidence, a newfound sense of purpose burned within me. If Nolan thought he could just toss me aside and ride off into the sunset with his mistress, he had another thing coming. I was done being the victim. It was time to plan my revenge. Armed with the incriminating evidence from Nolan's phone, I knew I had to confront him and Ivy directly. No more dancing around the issue. It was time to blow this sordid affair wide open. A few days later, I marched into Nolan's office building downtown, my heels clicking determinedly against the marble floors. The security guard eyed me warily as I blazed past the reception desk. "Ma'am, you can't just go up there," he called out, but I ignored him, stabbing the button for the elevators. When I stepped out onto Nolan's floor, I spotted him immediately through the glass walls of his office. He was bent over his desk, completely engrossed in whatever was on his computer screen. Ivy was there too, perched on the edge of his desk in a tight skirt that rode dangerously high up her thighs. She leaned in close as they pored over the documents together, her chest practically spilling out of her blouse. White-hot fury licked at my insides as I watched their intimate display. Gripping the manila envelope containing the printed text messages, I stormed over and flung the door open with a bang. Nolan's head snapped up, his eyes widening in shock and fear. "Lila, what are you doing here?" Ivy simply raised an immaculately groomed eyebrow, her lips curling into a disdainful smirk. Well, if it isn't the little wife." I leveled my gaze at her, jaw clenched. "Save it, you home-wrecking snake. I know all about your sordid little affair with my husband." Reaching into the envelope, I pulled out the printouts and flung them onto Nolan's desk, the papers fluttering across the surface. Nolan went deathly pale as he scanned the indisputable evidence. "How did you—" "Does it matter?" I seethed, rounding on him. "What matters is that you've been lying and cheating on me this entire time." I turned back to Ivy, who was examining her manicured nails with a bored expression. "And you make me sick, preying on my husband like some cheap, shameless hussy." A mocking laugh bubbled from her lips. "Oh, feisty. I can see why Nolan's so smitten." She traced a finger along Nolan's arm, her touch lingering just a beat too long. "Isn't that right, handsome?" My blood boiled at her taunting words. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Before I could stop myself, I lunged forward and slapped Ivy clear across the face, the sound reverberating through the office like a gunshot. "You bitch!" she shrieked, clutching her stinging cheek. Her perfectly coiffed hair was mussed, mascara smudged under her eyes. "You're gonna regret that." Nolan leapt to his feet, grabbing my arms to restrain me. "Lila, stop! You're causing a scene." But I wasn't finished. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I wheeled on him next. "No, you stop," I shouted, shoving him away from me. "This is the only way either of you snakes will listen. I want a divorce, Nolan. This marriage is over." He froze, his expression crumpling. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw remorse flicker in his eyes. "Lila, please," he started, reaching out imploringly, but I cut him off with a cold, steely glare. "You made your bed, Nolan. Now you can lie in it, with her." I jabbed an accusing finger at Ivy, whose cheeks were still flushed with outrage. As I turned on my heel and stormed out, I could hear the shocked murmurs of Nolan's coworkers who had witnessed the whole sordid scene. But I didn't care. The cheating liars had been exposed, and soon they'd face the consequences of their despicable actions. My quest for revenge was only just beginning. In the days following my explosive confrontation with Nolan and Ivy, I found myself surprisingly calm. The initial storm of anger and betrayal had passed, replaced by a steely determination to make them pay for what they'd done. I may have lost my husband, but I hadn't lost my self-respect. And I'd be damned if I let those two schemers just ride off into the sunset without facing any consequences. So I devised a plan, a deliciously devious scheme that would hit them where it hurt most, their reputations and their pocketbooks. First, I gathered even more evidence, documenting every instance of Nolan's misconduct that violated his company's ethics policies. The misuse of corporate resources for his dalliances with Ivy, the inappropriate relationships, the blatant lies on his expense reports to cover up their escapades. I compiled it all into a tidy file, complete with copies of those damning text messages, ready to present to his boss and the HR department. Next, I dug deeper into Ivy's background, searching for any skeletons in her closet that could be used as leverage. As it turned out, the sleazy homewrecker had quite a few secrets of her own. Like the fact that she was carrying on not just with my husband, but with another married executive at the company too. Or how about those shady business dealings with a former client that had led to a nasty lawsuit? I gathered all the sordid details and incriminating documents, preparing to leak them to the press and Ivy's unsuspecting partner at just the right moment. With everything in place, I decided to lull my prey into a false sense of security first. I started being overly friendly with Nolan again, pretending I was finally ready to forgive and move on. "Lila, I'm so sorry," he blubbered during one of our clandestine meetups at a cafe near his office. "What I did was inexcusable, but I want to make things right. I still love you." I gave him my most radiant smile, pulling his hands into mine. "I know, baby, and I love you too. That's why I'm willing to give our marriage another chance." He seemed stunned by my apparent change of heart, but too desperate and pathetic to question it. Over the next few weeks, I let him think we were working through the hurt and rebuilding our trust, all the while compiling more proof of his indiscretions behind the scenes. Ivy, for her part, seemed utterly convinced that she'd won. The smug look she shot me whenever our paths crossed said it all. Little did either of them know, I was simply luring them into my carefully laid trap. Everything was going according to plan. Finally, when I had enough ammunition to bury them both, I started planting little seeds here and there. An anonymous email to Ivy's partner with details of her affairs, a copied file mysteriously left on her boss's desk at work. At first, they brushed it off as someone's attempt at a sick joke. But slowly, the dominoes began to fall into place around them. Ivy started facing whispers and stares everywhere she went, as the news of her transgressions spread like wildfire. Clients began dropping her company left and right, the two disgusted by her unethical behavior. Nolan, meanwhile, found himself being summoned into endless meetings with HR and the executives, as each new piece of evidence against him came to light. His desperate pleas of innocence fell on increasingly deaf ears. They say the best revenge is living well. But there's also a particular satisfaction in being the architect of your enemy's downfall, watching every last piece of their lives crumble around them because of their own vile misdeeds. As Ivy and Nolan began to drown in the tsunami of consequences they'd brought upon themselves, I stood back and observed with a dark, triumphant smile. The cheating liars were getting exactly what they deserved, and it was all thanks to the deliciously devious scheme I'd executed to perfection. As the fallout from my meticulously planned revenge scheme intensified, It was almost comical to witness Ivy and Nolan's lives unraveling before their eyes. Ivy's entire world came crashing down in spectacular fashion. Word of her affairs with multiple married executives spread like wildfire, earning her a reputation as a home-wrecking pariah. Clients dropped her firm left and right, disgusted by her unethical behavior. Even her own partner wasn't spared from the shockwaves. After receiving those anonymous emails detailing Ivy's indiscretions, he promptly kicked her out and filed for divorce, leaving her with nothing. I'll never forget the look on her face when she showed up at my doorstep one evening, tears of makeup streaking her cheeks. "You did this," she choked out, hatred burning in her eyes. "You ruined everything." I simply gave her a cold, triumphant smile. "I warned you not to mess with me, Ivy. You reap what you sow." With a guttural scream of rage, she lunged at me, hands outstretched like claws, but I was ready, sidestepping her attack with ease. "Save it," I spat as she crashed against the doorframe. "You've already lost. Now get out of my sight before I call the cops." Ivy slunk away in humiliated defeat, her life in utter ruins because of her own despicable actions. Karma, as they say, is a bitch. As for Nolan, well, let's just say he didn't fare much better. Turns out his cozy tech company had a very strict no-fraternization policy that he'd blatantly violated. Strike one. Then there were all those expense reports he'd falsified to cover up his and Ivy's little rendezvous, using corporate funds for personal dalliances. Strike two. When the higher-ups received that anonymous file detailing every last instance of misconduct, ethics breach, and company policy violation, they didn't take it lightly. Strike three, you're out. Nolan was promptly fired and faced with a mountain of damning evidence that could potentially lead to legal troubles, all because he couldn't keep it in his pants. He came crawling to me one evening, a sniveling, pathetic mess desperate for my forgiveness and support. As if. "Lila, please," he blubbered, clutching the manila envelope of termination papers. "I've lost everything because of my stupid mistakes. My job, my reputation, it's all gone. You have to help me." I fixed him with a cold, steely glare, fighting back the urge to spit in his face. "The only one who has to do anything here is you," I stated flatly. "You need to sign those divorce papers and get the hell out of my life for good." Nolan's jaw dropped in stunned disbelief. But I thought we were working things out? You said you forgave me." A harsh laugh tore from my throat. "You're even dumber than you look if you actually believed that load of crap." Reaching into my purse, I pulled out a crisp folder and tossed it at his feet, the contents spilling across the floor, copies of every last text between him and Ivy, evidence of his corporate violations, you name it. "That's just a taste of all the proof I gathered while I was pretending to take you back," I said, watching realization slowly dawn over his stupid, cheating face. "Everything you've lost, your job, your money, your precious Ivy, it's all because of your own sickening behavior. I just gave you the consequences you deserved." Nolan's mouth opened and closed like a gasping fish as he processed the magnitude of what I'd done. You planned this whole thing? All of it?" I leveled him with a look of pure disdain. "You're damn right I did. I told that snake Ivy she was going to regret the day she messed with me, and I meant it. Now here we are, and you're both getting exactly what you deserve. To lose everything, just like I did when you betrayed me." With a look of utter devastation, Nolan slumped to his knees, cradling his head in his hands as racking sobs shook his body. But I felt no pity whatsoever, only a deep sense of satisfaction that karmic justice had been served. Months later, as the crisp autumn air turned to the bitter chill of winter, I could finally begin to breathe again. The deep wounds left by Nolan's betrayal were starting to heal over, leaving me stronger and more resilient than ever before. I'd moved out of our suburban home that once felt like a gilded cage into a cozy downtown apartment that was all my own. With the hefty divorce settlement and my renewed focus on work, I was building a new life for myself from the ashes of my shattered marriage. It felt incredible to stand on my own 2 feet again, no longer weighed down by the constant anxiety and heartbreak of Nolan's infidelity. I was finally free. Of course, there were still tough days when the anger and hurt would bubble back up unexpectedly. Like the morning I ran into Nolan at a cafe near my new place, I just ordered my usual soy latte when that all-too-familiar voice made me freeze. "Lila?" Is that you?" I turned slowly to see him sitting at a corner table, looking unbearably pathetic in a rumpled suit and day-old stubble. The light had gone out of his eyes, leaving them dull and haunted. Part of me wanted to keep walking, to pretend I hadn't seen the sad shell of a man he'd become, but another part felt compelled to face him, to confirm just how far he'd fallen from grace. "Nolan," I said flatly, clutching my coffee cup. "Fancy meeting you here." He opened his mouth as if to say something, then seemed to think better of it. An awkward silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken history. How are you doing?" he finally managed, rubbing the back of his neck anxiously. I gave a nonchalant shrug. "I'm good, actually. Really good. Teaching keeps me busy, and I've been exploring some fun hobbies in my free time." That's great, Lila. I'm happy for you." His voice was subdued, defeated. We both knew I was lying through my teeth. I was more than just good. I was thriving, flourishing in the aftermath of shedding him from my life. Nolan, on the other hand? Well, one look at his haggard face and slumped shoulders told the whole story. Losing his fancy job, his status, his money, and his mistress in one fell swoop had clearly broken something inside him. Part of me felt a pang of pity, but the rest of me remained coldly indifferent, even satisfied to see the pathetic, sniveling man he'd become. This was the price he paid for his sickening betrayal. Let it be a hard lesson etched into his bones. As I turned to leave, coffee in hand, Nolan reached out as if to stop me. "Lila, wait." His voice cracked with desperation. "I'm so sorry. For everything. You didn't deserve any of that pain I caused you. I was a stupid, selfish bastard, and I'll regret it until the day I die." I paused, letting his words hang heavy in the air between us. Once upon a time, I might have accepted that apology, might have even felt the sting of tears. But now, those useless words just rolled off me like water off a duck's back. We were far past the point of making amends. Fixing him with a cool, appraising stare, I simply said, "I know you are, and I truly don't care anymore, Nolan. That's the beautiful part." I left him gaping after me, mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, as I strode out of the cafe with my head held high. No more tears, no more anger, just the delicious sense of closure after claiming my long-overdue justice. That poisoned chapter of my life was finally, blessedly, over. And as I stepped out into the brisk morning air, breathing in the crispness of my newfound freedom, I felt an overwhelming sense of lightness washing over me. The cheating liar who'd once crushed my heart under his heel was now powerless. I'd conquered the demons of betrayal through the sweetest revenge imaginable, breaking the cycle and choosing to live well instead of being consumed by hatred. With a faint smile playing on my lips, I pressed on down the sidewalk, eagerly ready to embrace this new and infinitely brighter path laid out before me. The phone rang, slicing through the silence of my modest living room. I, Emily Townsend, a 38-year-old working mother, never expected that call to shatter the life I knew. "Emily, I'm leaving you. I've found someone else. Oh, and there's about $250,000 of debt in your name. Handle it, will you?" Michael's voice, once so familiar and comforting, was now cold, detached. My heart sank. This had to be a cruel joke. "Michael, what are you talking about?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper, but he was relentless. "You heard me. I'm with Claire now. She understands me, unlike you. Goodbye, Emily." And with that, he hung up. I stood there, phone still in hand, feeling as if the ground had been yanked from under me. Tears welled up in my eyes, not just for the betrayal, but for the sheer impossibility of the debt he'd saddled me with. "Mom, are you okay?" Anna, my 10-year-old daughter, walked in, her small face etched with concern. I forced a smile, masking my turmoil. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm fine." But Anna wasn't fooled. She hugged me, a gesture offering more comfort than she knew. After Anna went to bed, I sat alone, the weight of my new reality suffocating me. How could Michael do this to us? We had a life, a family. And now I was alone, buried under a mountain of debt I had no knowledge of. I logged into our online banking, hoping Michael's call was just a terrible mistake. My heart sank further as I saw the near-empty account. Michael had drained everything, leaving only a trail of unpaid bills and maxed-out credit cards. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spent hours staring at the ceiling, grappling with the betrayal. Michael, the man I had loved and trusted, had turned my life into a nightmare. And the worst part, I had no idea how to wake up from it. Before the turmoil, there was a time when laughter filled our home. I met Michael at a charity event. He was charming, his smile infectious. I remember thinking how lucky I was when he asked me out. Those initial dates blossomed into a whirlwind romance. We were young, in love, and the world seemed full of possibilities. Our wedding was a modest affair, but it was perfect. Surrounded by close friends and family, I felt like the happiest woman in the world. When Anna was born 2 years later, our joy multiplied. She was our little miracle, a perfect blend of Michael and me. Those early years were filled with simple pleasures, picnics in the park, movie nights cuddled on the couch, and Anna's laughter echoing through our home. I often found myself marveling at our little family, feeling a sense of contentment I never thought possible. But as Anna grew, so did the distance between Michael and me. It started subtly, missed dinners, late nights at the office, and weekends consumed by urgent work calls. I tried to bridge the gap, arranging date nights and family outings, but Michael always had an excuse. Then came the job losses. Michael's excuses grew thin as he hopped from one job to another. With each new position, his demeanor darkened. The loving man I married was slowly replaced by a stranger, one who snapped at the slightest provocation and withdrew into himself. I remember one evening trying to discuss his job situation. His response still echoes in my mind. "What do you know about pressure, Emily? You just sit at home taking care of Anna. You don't understand what it's like in the real world." His words stung. I had given up my career to support his, to be there for Anna. Didn't that count for something? As Michael's behavior became increasingly erratic, I returned to the workforce. It wasn't just for financial stability. It was to fill the growing void in my heart. I missed the connection we once had, the sense that we were a team. Looking back, those signs were there, warning me of the storm that was about to hit. I just chose to ignore them, clinging to the memory of the man I fell in love with, hoping he would return. The unraveling of our life began with whispers of doubt and ended in a cacophony of betrayal. As Michael's job instability grew, so did the tension in our home. His once sporadic late nights became the norm. Each time he stumbled in, reeking of alcohol, a part of my heart crumbled. One evening, as I was putting Anna to bed, she asked, "Mommy, why is Daddy always mad?" Her innocent question pierced me. "Daddy's just tired from work, sweetie," I answered, though I knew the truth was far more complicated. The final straw came when I discovered a series of receipts for expensive jewelry and hotel stays. Confronting Michael led to a ferocious argument, the first of many. "You're suffocating me, Emily," he yelled. "I need some space, some freedom." "Freedom? Is that what you call spending our savings on whatever this is?" I countered, holding up the receipts. He snatched them from my hand, his eyes blazing. "You wouldn't understand. You're just a housewife. What do you know about living a life?" I stood there stunned as he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. His words, so callous and dismissive, echoed in my mind. Was this really the man I married? Determined to protect Anna and myself, I made the decision to return to work. My old job at the marketing firm welcomed me back, and I threw myself into it. The work was a welcome distraction from the chaos at home. Yet, as I worked late into the night, a gnawing feeling of guilt consumed me. I was missing precious moments with Anna, all because of Michael's selfishness. It wasn't fair. She didn't deserve this. The nights grew lonelier. Michael's presence in the house became like a ghost, there, but not really. His indifference towards Anna, his once cherished daughter, hurt the most. He was slipping away from us, and I felt powerless to stop it. It was during these dark times that I found solace in my friendship with Rachel. She became my confidant, my rock. "You're stronger than you know, Emily," she would often tell me. I wanted to believe her, but the shadows of doubt were overwhelming. As I lay in bed each night, listening to the silence of the house, I couldn't help but wonder where it all went wrong. When did the love and laughter turn into resentment and distance? The answers eluded me, much like the remnants of the happy life we once shared. Life, as I knew it, had become a juggling act. Balancing work, motherhood, and a crumbling marriage left me perpetually exhausted. Each day was a struggle to maintain a semblance of normalcy for Anna, who remained my beacon of hope. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I found Anna sitting at the kitchen table, her homework spread out in front of her. "Mom, can you help me with this?" she asked, pointing to a math problem. I sat down, the fatigue of the day weighing heavily on me. "Of course, honey," I replied, but my mind was elsewhere, tangled in a web of bills, work deadlines, and the latest argument with Michael. As we worked through the problem, my phone buzzed. It was Rachel. "Emily, are you okay? You sounded off at work today." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "I'm just tired, Rachel. Tired of everything." Anna looked up at me, her eyes filled with concern. "Mom, you're working too hard. Can't Daddy help?" Her question was like a dagger to my heart. How could I explain to her that her father, the man who should have been our pillar, had become our greatest burden? Michael's presence in the house had become almost non-existent. When he was home, his disdain was palpable. Our interactions were limited to brief, bitter exchanges, often culminating in him storming out to spend the night God knows where. The climax of our deteriorating relationship came one rainy night. Michael arrived home late, his clothes drenched, his eyes wild. "I lost my job," he blurted out, a mix of anger and desperation in his voice. I stood there, stunned. "What happened?" "They're a bunch of idiots. They don't appreciate me," he spat, his voice laced with venom. I tried to reason with him, to discuss our next steps, but he was beyond reach. "You wouldn't understand, Emily. You live in this little bubble, thinking everything is fine. Well, it's not." His words hung in the air, a testament to the vast chasm that had grown between us. I realized then that the man I married, the man I loved, was gone. In his place stood a stranger, fueled by bitterness and regret. The following weeks were a blur. I worked tirelessly, my thoughts consumed by financial worries and the well-being of Anna. The strain took its toll, and my health began to falter. But I couldn't stop. Too much depended on me. Then, one fateful day at work, the world spun, and darkness engulfed me. I woke up in a hospital bed, Rachel and Anna by my side. The doctor's words were a wake-up call. "You need to slow down, Emily. Your body can't handle this stress." But how could I slow down? How could I, when our world was falling apart? Lying in the sterile hospital bed, a myriad of tubes and monitors attached to me, I couldn't help but feel defeated. The doctor's diagnosis was clear: stress-induced exhaustion, compounded by the early stages of an ulcer. But the real shock came when they found a small malignant lump in my breast. "Mom, you're going to be okay, right?" Anna's voice trembled with fear. I squeezed her hand, mustering a smile. "Of course, honey. Mommy's a fighter, remember?" Rachel, ever the supportive friend, was there too, her face etched with worry. "Emily, you need to take care of yourself. You can't keep going like this." I knew she was right, but the thought of slowing down, of letting Michael's irresponsibility win, was unbearable. Yet the reality of my health situation was a wake-up call. I had to be there for Anna. As I lay in the hospital processing my diagnosis, my phone rang. It was Michael. His voice was as cold and distant as ever. "Heard you're in the hospital. Bad timing, Emily. I need you to deal with some things." His callousness took my breath away. "Michael, I have cancer," I said, the words heavy on my tongue. There was a pause, and for a moment I thought I heard a hint of concern in his voice. But then he said, "Well, that's your problem. I have my own issues to deal with." I ended the call, a mix of anger and disbelief churning inside me. How could the man I once loved be so heartless? The next few days were a whirlwind of tests and consultations. Amidst it all, Rachel and Anna were my pillars, their love and support unwavering. But as I lay there, a plan began to form in my mind. Michael had left us in shambles, but I wouldn't let him destroy us. It was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. With Rachel's help, I started digging into our finances. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became. Michael had not only amassed a huge debt in my name, but had also been siphoning money from Anna's college fund. The final straw came when I discovered he'd taken out a second mortgage on our house without my knowledge. The depth of his deceit knew no bounds. "Rachel, we need to do something," I said, a newfound determination in my voice. Rachel nodded, her eyes fierce. "Don't worry, Emily. We'll make him pay for this. He won't get away with it." As I lay there, recovering, I knew one thing for sure. Michael had underestimated me. He thought he could break me, leave me to pick up the pieces of his mess. But he was wrong. I was going to fight back. Not just for me, but for Anna. And I would start by making Michael accountable for every single betrayal. The day I left the hospital marked the beginning of a new chapter. I was weak, physically and emotionally, but my resolve was stronger than ever. Armed with the evidence of Michael's financial treachery, Rachel and I devised a plan to confront him and bring his deceit to light. Rachel had been doing some digging of her own. Emily, you won't believe this. Michael's working at a tech startup now, and guess what? It's in the same building as my office. This was our chance. We decided to confront him there, in a public place where he couldn't avoid us. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized he couldn't escape the consequences of his actions. The next day, with Anna safely at a friend's house, Rachel and I headed to Michael's workplace. My heart pounded as we entered the building. We found him in the lobby, chatting and laughing with a younger woman. The sight of him, so carefree, ignited a fire in me. "Michael," I called out, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He turned, his smile faltering as he saw me. The woman beside him, presumably Claire, looked on, puzzled. "What are you doing here, Emily?" Michael's voice was a mix of annoyance and surprise. I stepped forward, Rachel by my side. "We need to talk about the debts, the mortgage, and everything you've stolen from Anna and me." Michael glanced around nervously, aware of the curious eyes on us. "Not here, Emily. This isn't the place." "No, Michael, you don't get to decide that anymore," I said firmly. "You've left me with a mountain of debt, and I have cancer because of the stress you've caused. It's time you faced up to what you've done." Claire's eyes widened in shock. "Cancer? Michael, what is she talking about?" Michael's facade crumbled. He tried to usher Claire away, but she resisted. "No, I want to know what's going on. What debt?" I looked Claire in the eyes. "He's been using my name to take out loans, max out credit cards, even drained our daughter's college fund." Claire turned to Michael, betrayal etched on her face. "Is that true, Michael?" He had no words, just stood there, trapped in the web of his own lies. It was a small victory, but seeing him exposed for who he truly was in front of Claire and his colleagues gave me a sense of justice. As Rachel and I left the building, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The road ahead was still daunting, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the upper hand. Michael would no longer control our lives. It was time for him to pay for his actions, and I was just getting started. After the confrontation, our next step was legal action. Rachel, ever the resourceful one, connected me with a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer, Diane. She was a force to be reckoned with, and exactly what I needed. Diane pored over the documents I had gathered. "We have a strong case," she assured me. "Not only can we sue for the debts he incurred in your name, but we can also go after him for fraud and emotional distress." The idea of taking Michael to court was daunting, but it was necessary. He had to be held accountable. Meanwhile, Rachel kept an eye on Michael's movements. "He's unraveling, Emily. Claire left him, and it looks like his job is on the line, too." Good, I thought. He was finally feeling the weight of his actions. The day of the court hearing arrived. Michael was there, looking deflated, a far cry from the confident man he once was. As the proceedings began, it became clear that the evidence against him was overwhelming. Michael's lawyer tried to paint him as a man who had simply made some financial missteps, but Diane tore through their arguments. She presented the evidence of his fraudulent activities, his draining of Anna's college fund, and the impact of his actions on my health. The judge was sympathetic to our case. "Mr. Townsend, your actions have caused significant harm to your family. It's clear you acted with deceit and selfishness." The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered the verdict. Michael was found liable for the debts and ordered to pay restitution. Additionally, he would face criminal charges for his fraudulent activities. As we left the courtroom, Michael tried to approach me. "Emily, I'm sorry." I looked at him, feeling a sense of closure. "Your apologies mean nothing now, Michael. You're going to face the consequences of what you've done." Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a sense of empowerment. It wasn't just about the legal victory. It was about standing up to the man who had tried to break me. I had fought back and won. The battle was over, but the war was not. There were still challenges ahead: my health, rebuilding my life, ensuring Anna's future. But I faced them with a newfound strength. Michael Townsend would no longer cast a shadow over our lives. It was time for Anna and me to step into the light. The aftermath of the trial marked the beginning of a new life for Anna and me. The victory in court was more than just a legal triumph. It was a reclaiming of our dignity and strength. Yet, the true battle lay in rebuilding our lives from the ruins Michael had left behind. I returned to work with a renewed focus, determined to provide a stable and loving home for Anna. She was flourishing in school, her resilience a constant source of pride for me. We had weathered the storm together, and our bond had only grown stronger. Rachel was a regular visitor, always bringing warmth and laughter into our home. "You know, Emily, you're an inspiration," she said to me one evening as we sat in my living room, a sense of peace finally settling around us. I smiled, looking over at Anna, who was engrossed in a book. "I had a good teacher," I replied, my eyes meeting Rachel's. We had been through so much, but her friendship had been a guiding light through the darkest times. As for Michael, his downfall was swift. The loss of his job and reputation, coupled with the legal repercussions, had taken their toll. He tried to reach out a few times, perhaps seeking forgiveness or pity, but I had closed that chapter of my life. I was no longer the woman he had left in shambles. I was stronger, wiser, and free from his toxic presence. The journey wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt and fear, but each step forward was a testament to our resilience. Anna and I had not just survived. We had thrived. One evening, as I tucked Anna into bed, she looked up at me with those big, bright eyes. "Mom, we're going to be okay, right?" I nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be more than okay. We have each other, and that's all we need." As I turned off the light and left her room, I felt a sense of contentment. Our future was uncertain, but it was ours to shape. The scars of the past would always be there, but they no longer defined us. In the quiet of the night, I sat by the window, gazing at the stars. Life had thrown us into turmoil, but we had emerged stronger. We had faced our challenges head-on and reclaimed our lives. This was our new dawn, a time of healing and hope. And as I looked up at the night sky, I knew that no matter what lay ahead, Anna and I would face it together, with courage, love, and an unbreakable spirit.